So most of the time where you want to loop through an object collection, this is the best way to do it. However, you can still use a for next loop, and one of the benefits of doing that is that you have the counter at your disposal, which you can use to fine-tune how the looping is actually executed. Let's go back to full module view. And let's call this final macro for next objects. So let's take an example of looping through the items within an object collection. The collection in question, I'll just quickly show you. In the word interface, it's file info, and on the right here we have properties and advanced properties. And these are the properties that we'll be looping through. So they're divided here into different categories, and in VBA they're known as built-in document properties, and they are in turn a property of the document object. So let's declare some variables, starting with I as integer, which will be our counter. Then we'll need to know how many items there are in the collection. So we'll call that one int BDP, as in built-in document properties, and this will be integer. Then let's create a new document. So we'll have a document variable. Then we'll read the name of each property into a string variable, so str name as string, and the value associated with that property also into a string variable. So these are our variables. So the first thing we'll do is to create a new document. Then we'll add a table to it. Then we'll enter some headings. And then we'll loop through the built-in document properties collection. Then inside the loop, we'll capture the name of each property, capture the value of each property, and then we'll write the name inside the table in column 1, and then we'll write the value in column 2. Okay, so to create the new document, as we've seen a few times, it's set doc_new equal to documents.add, and to create the table, we'll simply go back to our previous section, and let's just grab the code that we recorded using the macro recorder. And we can then use doc_new instead of simply active document. On this occasion, we'll need, instead of 2, we'll need to use int BDP. So this is simply the number of items within the collection that we're looping through. And since we also want to have headings, we'll need to put +1 here. Then for the number of columns, we'll need 2. Now, of course, we haven't yet calculated what this is, so that's something I neglected to do. Let's just pop that in. Find number of items in collection. And to do that, it's going to be let rather than set, and as we know, we omit let. So it's int BDP equals, and in VBA, when you want to find out how many items there are in a collection, you normally use the count property. So we start with .new, .built-in document properties, count. Okay, so now we can go on to enter the headings. And again, if we go back to the previous sections module and look at our create headings that we did, we basically need these 3 lines, or a variation of these 3 lines. So we write the first heading, we move to the next cell, and we write the second heading. So this is property name, and then here property value. So let's just save what we've got so far and test it. So there's our 2-column table, and it's got a number of rows, and hopefully that number corresponds to the number of items within the collection that we're looping through. So now we can loop through the collection. So this is our for next loop. So it's for counter equals start value to end value step X, and then we'll close it using next counter. So the counter is I, so both of these become I. The start value is 1, i.e. the first item in the collection, and the end value is our variable, which we've called int DDP. Our step value is 1, and since that's the default, we can simply delete the step parameter. So now we want to capture the name into our variable called strName. So it's let, which we omit, strName equal, and we then need this syntax, which refers to the entire collection, and we specify which item we want to process by placing an index in parentheses after that statement. And the index that you very often use within a loop is the name of the counter. So because this value is constantly changing, this is equivalent to saying each, because each time you go through the loop, it will have a different value which will correspond to the next item inside the collection. Having identified the item, we then drill down and extract its name property. So the value, capturing the value, will follow the same pattern. str value, and then at the end it's going to be dot value. Having captured those 2 elements, we now want to output them to the table, and we can simply use these 2 lines. So we move to the next cell, and then here we obviously want to write the name. So that's strName, and we do the same here. And this time we want to write the value, so str value. I'll just tab all of these lines in to make them a bit more readable. Now when we test this code, we're going to have a slight problem, because the value of one of these properties can only be extracted if it's been set. And in the case of a brand new document, there are a number of these properties which haven't yet been set. So when you try to read the value, you end up with an error. So it's definitely a good idea to save before we test, which you should always do anyway. So we get an error message, and if we click on debug, this will tell us which line we've actually got to. So basically it's reading the value which hasn't been set, and that's what's generating the error. Now we haven't discussed error handling as yet, but we have discussed if statements. So I've made a note of which properties are actually problematic in that they haven't been set. And they are properties number 10, 12, 25, 26, 27, and 28. So for the moment, what we'll do is to use an if statement to make sure that these values aren't read. They're just skipped over, and perhaps we can enter a default value of not applicable or not available. And perhaps we can enter a default value instead of attempting to actually read the value property. So let's just have a look at the document that's been generated. So it got this far with no problem, but then when it tried to read the next value, it failed. So we'll close without saving. And this is the culprit. This is what's causing the problem. So we need to make sure that that is contained in an if statement so it doesn't attempt to do that line unless the conditions are correct. So we basically need to say if I is not equal to, that's the symbol that means not equal to, 10, and I is not equal to 12, and what we want to say, I is not equal to 25, 26, 27, or 28. And a quick way of doing that would be to say not, and then in brackets, I greater than or equal to 25, and I less than or equal to 28, and then close brackets. Then we need the keyword then. We can tab all of this in to make it more readable, and then close that with end if. And it might be useful to put an else in there as well. So str value equals, and let's just say not available. And again, we can save and we can test. So by using the if statement, we've managed to avoid the problem parameters, and we're only attempting to read the value on those elements where the value is available. The for next loop uses a counter to control the repeated execution of a series of statements. Within the loop, the counter itself can be used to further refine code execution. The for each next loop is used to loop through the items within a collection of word objects, such as documents. The for next loop uses the syntax for counter equals start value to end value step x, where x is any integer. Statements next counter. The for each next loop uses the syntax for each object variable in object collection. Statements next object variable.